Broward County, Florida is not exactly known for having good urbanism. While it began as a population center around the FEC, it mostly grew in the car age post World War II. The relentless suburban expansion westward towards the Everglades made it infamous in urban planning programs, with the term Browardization even being coined to describe when a community sprawls out of control and without regard to anything other than car traffic. Well, Broward kept growing, and today's dealing with the pains of never having invested in a meaningful transit system. In a previous video, I talked about the Broward PREMO plan, but mainly focused on the bus rapid transit network being proposed, which is excellent so long as these corridors actually get dedicated lanes. I steered clear of the proposed light rail to study it a bit more and get all my thoughts laid out. So what exactly is Broward's plan for its first rail rapid transit? Before starting off, I want to mention that I got help with a lot of the history and design of previous transit proposals through a conversation I had with Greg Stewart, the executive director of the Broward MPO.
Basically, the Broward MPO is the conduit for federal funding for local transportation projects. And what our charge is actually to coordinate local projects with both state and federal programs.
When Broward County Transit, for example, is to go apply for federal funds for a project like the light rail, is the MPO involved in that application and the management?
Absolutely, because they're asking for federal funds.
For those of you who don't have a good internal map of important destinations in Broward, here are some key points of interest. You've got the Fort Lauderdale-Hollywood International Airport, Port Everglades, which is one of the busiest cruise ports in the world, and a new hotel and convention center getting built nearby. Then north of that, you've got downtown Fort Lauderdale, a high-density and high-employment hub for the entire county of 2 million people. You've got pockets of higher residential and employment density throughout, but nothing compares to the Sawgrass Mall all the way at the western edge of the county. It gets in the neighborhood of 25 million annual visitors, making it the second most popular tourist attraction in Florida after Disney World. Here's a map of the light rail being proposed by the PREMO plan. It's broken into different phases, with some guaranteed and some not. The first phase is called the Airport Seaport Convention Center Connector, but we'll just call it Phase 1. The route does exactly what its name says, connecting the airport to the seaport and convention center with 3.5 miles of elevated light rail. Then you've got the Downtown Connector, which we're going to call Phase 2. This portion is going to leave the convention center on Southeast 17th Street heading west until it hits either Andrews Avenue or Southeast 3rd Avenue, then turn north until Broward Boulevard in the heart of downtown Fort Lauderdale, connecting to the Broward Medical Center and Broward County Courthouse complex along the way. Phase 3 has the creative name of Broward Boulevard. Here, the light rail goes west on Broward Boulevard all the way to State Road 7 US 441, connecting with the Brightline and future Coastal Link rail station in downtown Fort Lauderdale, the Broward Boulevard Tri-Rail Station, the future Powerline Road BRT, and the future State Road 7 BRT. Phase 4 is weird and very much not finalized yet, but the idea is to get from Broward and State Road 7 to the Sawgrass Mall with a loop line going along Sunrise and Commercial Boulevards. This part would connect to multiple planned BRT routes at State Road 7, Sunrise Boulevard, Oakland Park Boulevard, Commercial Boulevard, and University Drive. It's not finalized because it depends on having funds left over from the county transportation surtax, which remains to be seen. Well, some of you might be thinking it looks kind of familiar, and I don't just mean the multiple studies done by FDOT and the Broward MPO in the past to put light rail on Broward Boulevard and US 1 and Griffin Road. Back in 2018, the county and city of Fort Lauderdale had different plans for a streetcar called the Wave that was going to serve a lot of the same areas as this new LRT proposal, but it had issues. On the engineering side, it was going to be an at-grade streetcar in mixed traffic. This meant it was going to get stuck in the horrendous traffic of downtown Fort Lauderdale, making its riders experience the same delays as driving. It was also going to have very frequent stops, roughly every quarter mile. It was less the beginning of a regional transit system and more of a downtown circulator. It also had political issues. Back in 2018, Dean Trantalis was elected mayor, and Stephen Glassman and Ben Sorensen were elected city commissioners. All of them campaigned on killing the Wave. Following the election, they went against the county, state, and federal governments and voted 3-2 to do just that, and were required to return hundreds of millions of dollars to the federal government.
Many of us spiked the football because we thought it was over with, and it's never over with apparently. So even after the money was assigned, $126 million from the federal government, DOT was going to manage the contract. The county was going to committed operating funds, and I think it was like $1 million a year, which is actually relatively cheap. They went out to bid, they had solicitors, and it came in at $127 million. So $1 million overrun. That allowed for some space And at that point, that space, allowed for folks that showed up and said that the streetcar was going to sink into the ground because the soils couldn't support the weight. A registered engineer actually said that. I mean, I've never, I've lived in South Florida all my life. Trucks have not sunk into the ground anywhere, ever.
I want to give this new light rail plan credit. Part of the reason the wave failed was that the routing sucked. It twisted and turned and then didn't connect to any destinations outside of downtown.
Because what was problematic with the wave was it kind of was like a chicken. It just like went from one location to another, willy-nilly. This is a straight north-south pair.
This light rail line solves that problem. Phase 1 starts it off by connecting major activity centers. On its own, it's really just for tourists and not worth much. I mean, just look at the ridership projections. That's less than a lot of the existing bus routes get in Broward. But once it connects to downtown in Phase 2, you start cooking with gas as you connect major population centers. Phases 3 and 4 are what make the line really work and will do the most to generate ridership, offering connections to Brightline and eventually Coastal Link, Tri-Rail, and 6 different BRT lines. A huge amount of people are going to have easy access to major destinations like downtown, the airport, and Sawgrass Mall, with at most one transfer on rapid transit. It's part of an interconnected network, something the Wave wasn't, and it's a million times better for it. But now we have to look at the potential pitfall of this project. While BCT hasn't come out with preferences for design or grade separations for any phase except the first one, which will be elevated, there are rumors and rumblings about having parts of the line be on street level at grade, and having other parts be elevated. Notably, the only parts that certain politicians want to be at grade are the exact parts that are the most important to have grades separated. That is, the connection to and through downtown Fort Lauderdale. We've seen with the current debate over Coastal Link passenger rail having to go under or over the New River that Fort Lauderdale City Commission and Mayor are going to demand that this light rail not be elevated over downtown. Now, let me explain why this needs to be elevated. If your light rail is at grade, it must by definition go slower because it has to deal with car traffic, cyclists, and pedestrians possibly going over the tracks. It also likely has shorter stop spacing, meaning more frequent stops and a slower ride. This also means lower frequencies, because when the light rail stops, it will stop traffic. This is terrible for regional transit, where you want stops to be at least more than half a mile apart. If you make the ride too slow, people won't use it. You see this in cities all over North America, where an at-grade streetcar is constantly blocked by pedestrians, cyclists, traffic lights, and especially cars. Toronto's notorious for having its streetcars move slower than 10 miles per hour, for example. I used to live in Atlanta, and the downtown streetcar there gets near zero ridership because it's constantly blocked by cars. You could probably walk the route faster than the streetcar can take you. Also, by keeping it at street level, you need a physical driver present inside the vehicle to deal with potential safety issues like collisions with pedestrians or cars. If it's grade separated, the line can be automated. This would mean you can run it much more frequently and with lower operating costs by saving on labor. We already have an example of this in South Florida, the Miami Metro Mover. Additionally, by operating at street level, the rail vehicles have to fit in the street grid and make tighter turns, limiting how many cars your train can have. That will likely limit this light rail line to 2-car vehicles, as opposed to a more common 6 or 8-car configuration seen in grade-separated systems. By keeping it at grade, we would be giving up at least half the capacity of the transit line. I could keep going, but to save on time for this video, I highly recommend watching this video by Ode the Urbanity on the REM in Montreal, and how NIMBYs killed it by demanding it be underground or at street level, and how the elevated service is just better, and this other excellent video by RM Transit that goes over the same subject. Other cities that have on-street light rail ran into all of these exact issues where trains would be limited in capacity and would slow to a crawl in their downtowns. Some cities, like Portland, either have or are planning on grade separating their light rail in their downtowns at enormous costs because that's the only way to make the systems fast and reliable. We should learn from their mistakes and do it right the first time. But then we have a problem that most people don't think about, which is the actual inclines and declines this rail line would have to make to have any parts be at street level. Despite South Florida being flat as a pancake, there are points in this route where light rail will have to go over something. These points are the New River in downtown and the FEC rail line, where freight and passenger rail will both operate. The light rail likely won't be able to cross the river on the bridge of either roadway being studied, which are Andrews and Southeast 3rd Avenues. These bridges were built for cars, which can handle much steeper inclines and declines. Southeast 3rd Avenue Bridge has a grade of about 26%, and the Andrews Avenue Bridge has a grade of 35%. For context, while light rail can handle grades up to 10%, the general recommended grade is 3% for a comfortable ride. These bridges are 3 times as steep as what light rail can handle. The rail will need its own new bridge, so let's do the math and see what that would look like. First, let's look at the bridge over the FEC Railway, which has a minimum height clearance of 30 feet. To get 30 feet of height with a 3% grade, you need a horizontal distance of 1,000 feet. You'd have to start the incline at about Southeast 1st Avenue, meaning the light rail can't go up Andrews Avenue and it has to go up Southeast 3rd Avenue to get into downtown. This also means closing the intersection of Broward and Andrews, because the ramp wouldn't be tall enough for cars to pass underneath, which is a non-starter. If you do a 10% grade and a really uncomfortable ride, and possibly ADA violations, you can start the incline just west of Andrews. Now let's look at the New River. We'll say that the bridge for the light rail has to meet the same characteristics as the fixed bridge option that FDOT presented for the New River crossing for Coastal Link, which is 80 feet tall. I don't believe that the 55-foot tall drawbridge option would work, because a drawbridge would severely limit the frequency and speed that the rail can operate at. If you want the headways proposed in the plan, a drawbridge is a no-go. Now, 80 feet of height at a grade of 3% means about half a mile in horizontal space needed. This literally does not fit on either Andrews or Southeast 3rd before reaching Broward Boulevard. If you do the maximum 10% grade, you only need 800 feet, which does fit on both Andrews and Southeast 3rd Avenues, but again would only be on street level for a half a block on Andrews before needing to rise to cross the FEC, or for 3 or 4 blocks on Southeast 3rd Avenue and Broward before needing to rise to cross the FEC. In the Southeast 3rd Avenue scenario, you'd also have to close the intersection of Southeast 3rd and Los Olas Boulevard, another no-go. Is it worth it to do all this engineering work, making the ride incredibly uncomfortable for passengers, costing enormous sums of money, and closing major intersections just to have the light rail be on street level in downtown for a couple blocks? In my opinion, no. The much better option is to have it be elevated through the downtown core, making the ride comfortable, fast, frequent, and with as little interruption to street-level traffic as possible. The main arguments used by people against elevated trains in Fort Lauderdale are that they divide communities, will scar the downtown, and that people riding the trains will be looking directly into people's apartments. I'm sorry, but this just isn't true. This is covered much better by Oh Dear Vanity in the video I recommended earlier, but modern elevated trains are typically sleek and narrow and don't divide communities at all. Modern cities like Tokyo, Hong Kong, Paris, and Honolulu have modern elevated rail, and not only is it fine, it's actually led to better connected neighborhoods. As for scarring downtown, just look at Andrews Avenue, Southeast 3rd, and Broward Boulevard in downtown Fort Lauderdale. These streets are already scars. What exactly are we protecting here? They're car sewers, and an elevated rail would make all these streets better and more attractive to people walking, cycling, and obviously taking public transit. And as for the last complaint about train riders looking directly into people's apartments, that's also just not true. Let's take another look at these streets. What is it that you see abutting the roadways in the cases where there is a building? Parking garages. All these buildings in downtown Fort Lauderdale where this light rail is proposed have parking garages as tall as 8 stories, except for these 2 buildings at Broward and Southeast 3rd that have apartments closer to ground level. It's the same as the BS about not elevating the coastal link over the New River. What exactly are we protecting here? What exists now is a scar far worse than any elevated rail could be. The first part of it from airport to seaport and convention center, that's going to be elevated. And there's rumors that I've heard that future segments like along Broward Boulevard are going to be elevated as well, but that the city of Fort Lauderdale itself wants it to be a streetcar in the city as opposed to elevated.
Isn't that ironic?
Yeah. Because I'm looking at other cities like a Portland, for example, that they built it as a streetcar in downtown first to save costs and all that stuff, and now they're realizing, shoot, we lack capacity, we lack speed, we need to grade separate, and now they're going back and tunneling and spending billions of dollars, and it's like we're not really learning that lesson.
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that I can honestly say is if you don't learn from history, then you're doomed to relive it. And, we're watching reliving history a lot. So yeah, the elevated rail system, there's positives and negatives to it. At grade, also positives and negatives.
So what can we do? Well, Phase 1 is going to go out to bid on the design soon, with public comments happening at the end of 2025 or, let's be honest, probably 2026. When those comments open up, we need to show up and voice our concerns, asking for the light rail to be elevated and automated. The same thing when Phases 2 and 3 start up. In the meantime, reach out to your county commissioner asking for the light rail to be elevated throughout Broward County. The county is the one paying for and building this rail line, and ultimately will have the final say on the design. We need 6 of them to agree on this. If you live, work, or invest in the city of Fort Lauderdale, please reach out to your city commissioner and mayor to urge them to support elevated light rail in the city. Elevated light rail is not noisy, has the least impact on the street level while maintaining the highest quality of service, provides shade to the street, and does not decrease property values. In fact, it will likely increase property values and improve quality of life for downtown residents by giving them access to good transit. The PREMO plan is the most important thing to happen in Broward's history. Let's make sure that the crown jewel of the plan is the best it can possibly be. Thanks for watching.